Man, do I have a good one for you guys today. We're going to be talking about the Yamaha NS-10M Studio version. Now, I tried to get my hands on a pair of the original non-studio versions, but that's pretty hard to do. Even if I decided to buy them myself on eBay, you're talking about $600 for one that's in good shape, and I don't want anything that's beaten up. So I put a filler out for some of my friends on Facebook asking if anybody had the NS-10N, 10, 10, 10M. Good Lord. And a buddy of mine, Brian Gill, who is a producer out of Nashville, said, yeah, I can hook you up. The dude uses them in the studio. So what better speaker to get than ones that are actively being used to make music today? So first, I'm going to give a very quick background for those of you who are not familiar with this speaker. And it's not going to be deep. If you want to go down the rabbit hole of the Yamaha NS-10M, then there's so many videos and so many articles written about this speaker. I'm going to try to focus my time on the technical merits and also give you guys a sound demo of these speakers so you can understand what they sound like. The original NS-10M design was designed by a Yamaha engineer by the name of Akira Nakamura. This speaker was designed for hi-fi use and quickly fell out of favor. Apparently, it just sounded really bad. But an engineer or engineers picked this up for use in the studio. Now, there are conflicting stories about who was the first one. And initially, I thought it was this guy. And then it turns out some other guy in the UK may have been the first one to use them. But regardless of that, it became widely used in sound studios for engineering purposes with a trick. What these engineers did was they decided to put some tissue paper over the tweeter. Namely, it was Bob Clearmountain who is given the title of the original person to do this. The ironic thing is that there are studies now that show when you put tissue paper over the tweeter, it actually makes the sound worse. But regardless of that, what happened was 9, maybe 10 years later, after the original introduction of the 10M, Yamaha realized, hey, a lot of people are using these speakers as studio monitors and they're complaining about the highs and they want to knock those down and they're using tissue paper to do it. So why don't we make a new version called the 10M Studio, which is what I'm reviewing today. And then we're going to adjust the tweeter level. And we're also going to make the cabinet a little bit more robust. And we're going to do a couple little crossover tweaks. And we're also going to make the terminals on the back a little bit nicer. So that's what they wound up doing. The main difference in looking at the 10M versus the 10M Studio is the 10M was designed to be placed vertically, standing up vertically like a normal hi-fi type speaker. But when Yamaha redesigned it for the studio version, they made it to where it was intended to be laid out horizontally on top of a console, like a mixing console. And you can see that here, namely by the lettering being horizontal. Before I dig further into this, I really wanted to show you guys something I found that I just thought was amazing. Now, back in the maybe 70s, 80s, what was pretty typical, at least based on what I've seen as a reviewer and going back and looking at older designs, is that manufacturers were not afraid to put out meaningful specification sheets. Instead of just saying, here's a spec with a number, they actually would give you real data, which is amazing. Think about that. I mean, we don't get that from hardly anyone today. You have to rely on people like me to give that to you, which is honestly, it's just a shame. But nevertheless, we can see that the Yamaha Flyer provides the frequency response, some distortion, impedance, and even polar response. That's freaking awesome. And then they had their standard specifications. All of the data and even the impulse response that I'm about to provide you in order to give you a proper sound clip is captured using my Klippel near-field scanner. This is a state-of-the-art robotic device that allows me to get anechoic data in a non-anechoic environment so we can understand exactly what the speaker is doing without the influence of a room. What I want to do now is provide you with some sound clips of the NS-10M Studio compared to an original recording. And we can get an idea here of what is the 10M Studio doing to the recording? How is it altering the original sound? And why might an engineer or producer think that it's beneficial to have this sound? So let's do that first. We're going to do the original and then the 10M Studio and do that a couple times using pink noise to give you an idea of what stands out. Now, if I used regular music tracks, Who knows where the frequency band is going to lie for voices, for instruments and stuff like that. Pink noise is just the way to go to make things comparable apples to apples. So that's what we're doing. Now that you've heard that, this is what you heard. This is the frequency response for the 10M Studio. See this peaking right here through the mid-range area? Now, on average, your SPL is about 90.2, but that's taken with 300 hertz to 3 kilohertz in mind. This area right here is bringing that average up. Most likely, you're around 87 or so in the mid-range and then the high frequency, ignoring this peak. But once you look at this peak, you'll realize at about 1.7 kilohertz or so, there's a 7 decibel peak compared to the mid-range, and the highs are roughly maybe 4 to 5 decibels over the average sensitivity. That makes the speaker a little bit harder to compare average sensitivity to another one, and I really wanted to point that out. But when you heard this, what you should have heard, or the terms that I would use to describe that, can be anywhere from forward to bright or tinny even. Note that the F3 is at 126 and the F10 is at 75 hertz, but again, that's reference to this SPL. If I brought it down about 3 dB to where the mid-range average is closer to about 87 decibels or so, this F3 is going to shift down, F10 is going to shift down. But realistically, what you can say is that in most rooms, your F3 is going to be at around probably 100 hertz or something like that. You're not going to get much lower than that. Now, this is a sealed cabinet, so it has the typical sealed cabinet roll-off, which could be good, you know, if you need to place it close to a wall or something like that. It's not going to sound extra boomy, but you're just not going to get a lot of bass out of this thing, if any at all. Now, something else I took the time to do, I found the original frequency response of the 10M, not Studio. I copied that and then I overlaid it to my measured results for the 10M Studio, and that's what we see here. The NS-10M in the original version is blue. Now, remember, people were complaining about it being too bright for near-field mixing and listening. Well, honestly, this speaker actually looks better to me than the 10M Studio. To me, the 10M Studio is now even worse because they brought the tweeter level down about 2 to 3 decibels in some spots, and you've still got this big peak right here. When realistically, what the 10M Studio should have done is they should have just gone in here and brought this down some. Now, you can use an equalizer to do this. I don't remember what the exact values that I found were when I was playing with it, but I want to say that I set it to around 1.6 kilohertz. I put a Q of about, I think it was maybe 2, and I brought it down about 7 decibels. Realistically, you probably want to use a couple bands of EQ if you had the studio version to smooth this out more, but that kind of gives you a rough idea of where to start. So now let's look at the CEA 2034 data set, which is what we've got here. And we can see that this is the same thing that we looked at a minute ago, but I really want to focus on the directivity. The directivity for this speaker is pretty poor. And keep in mind that when I measured the speaker, I measured it laying down on its side like it's designed to be used on a console. So if you were to listen to these in the far field and you were to have maybe some nearby walls for reflections, then you're going to have some issues in this particular region. And you're not going to be able to equalize that because the reflections are different than the on-axis sound. And if you try to EQ one, you're also EQing the other. So if you've got a dip in response on axis, but a peak off axis because of the reflections, and you try to bring up that dip, well, then you're just increasing the peak from the reflections, and you're just basically fighting a losing battle. Out of curiosity, I threw some toilet paper, and I'm not going to say it was used, toilet paper over the tweeter for this particular speaker, even though we're not supposed to, even though this issue is supposed to have been solved with the 10M Studio. I was curious. So this is what we get. We get more diffraction. So actually, the tissue doesn't help at all. It's really useless. And again, as I referenced earlier, when people use this trick on the original 10M and use them in a studio, they were just getting more comb filtering issues. They weren't really solving this concern about high frequency brightness. Really, the issue always lied in the mid-range between about 1 to 2 kilohertz, that plus 7 decibel bump. Even for the 10M, it was about plus 5 decibels over the tweeter and the mid-range. So that should have been the issue that should have been targeted, not trying to diffuse the tweeter level. If you were listening to these in a larger room and you were further away than a meter, maybe you were a couple meters out and you had reflections, this is the response that you could expect to get in your room. And then this is again what you would expect to hear. This really isn't a lot different than what you saw in the on-axis response. The main difference here is just that the response is tilted down. Now I've got a video discussing flat in-room versus flat anechoic and why flat in-room is a terrible idea. And if you want good sound, you're going to want a speaker that's tilting down. So you should never target a speaker to have a flat in-room response. That's a bad idea. Watch the video. I'll try to remember to put it in the card up here. This is the burst decay. So we can see some, I called it cone breakup, and that's kind of an engineering guess because I'm assuming the crossover is still around 2K, and I'm assuming we've got some cone issues with the breakup coming in above the crossover point. Now this could be something else, but I think this is probably ringing from the mid woofer. In the horizontal laid on its side position, the horizontal contour or the horizontal radiation of the speaker is just not good. You got about maybe plus or minus 20 degrees off that tweeter axis that you can sit at. And if you do any more than that, everything like tonally is just way off. The vertical response actually isn't too bad. I mean, we see some flaring in the upper mid-range, lower treble region around here, but for a speaker that was designed around 88 or so, I mean, it's not bad. Harmonic distortion at 86 decibels and then at 96 decibels. But note down here that I'm going off the average SPL. Multi-tone distortion, okay, not terrible. I've seen much worse even with speakers made this year. Compression linearity for dynamic range, same kind of deal. It's not terrible. Now, I've run into this where I see some higher compression with the tweeter. The fact that this speaker is older may kind of give us an idea of maybe the fluid in the tweeter is dried up. I'm not sure if it uses ferrofluid. I'm assuming it probably does. It's possible that it's dried up. It doesn't affect lower level voltages sweeps, but for higher voltage level sweeps where you need some kind of cooling factor for the voice coil for the tweeter, then it can affect it. So it's possible that the higher compression order value here and the higher output of 102 is caused by maybe it needs new ferrofluid. I can't say. Speaker's not damaged, still works, thank goodness. But overall, you know, I'm kind of surprised that it looks like this. I thought it was going to be much, much worse. And that does it for this review of the Yamaha NS-10M Studio. I want to thank Brian again for loaning me these speakers and trusting me to not blow them up and destroy them. This has been an interesting little rabbit hole that I've gone down. And as I said earlier, if you want to delve into it a little bit more on your own, there's a lot of really great articles and videos and even white papers written about the original 10M and the 10M Studio speakers. It's just really cool to kind of go back and look at what were people using back then? Why were they using it? Why did they think certain things work? Now we have an understanding of maybe if you go listen to some of the songs that you enjoy from maybe the 80s or 90s or anything that maybe is mixed on them today, if you feel like the mid-range is a little bit hollow, it could very well be because they were mixed with these speakers that have a boosted mid-range. Possibly. Now, some engineers will say, well, I know that it's got this boosted mid-range, so I'm compensating for it with my ears. To that, I would say, why not just use a more linear speaker and not have to do these brain checks of, I got to bring this down 7 decibels and it's got to have this curve to it, which isn't your standard graphic EQ curve, by the way. It's probably going to take 2 bands of EQ to really smooth that out properly. Now, with 1 band of parametric EQ, you could kind of get close, but it's still going to be a little bit lumpy dumpy there. So again, I'm going back to maybe we just don't use speakers where we have to compensate for them orally. If you even can do that, I'm not sold that people can really do that effectively. And I know producers, engineers are going to come at me in the comments. I'm just saying, use a better speaker maybe. Still, this has been fun. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, comment section below. Thumbs up would be appreciated. Let's see here. You can join me at patreon.com/Erin's Audio Corner, or you can use any of my generic affiliate links in the comment section below. They won't link you to anything specific. They'll just take you to the generic homepage of the website, Crutchfield, Best Buy, Walmart, Target, etc. And if you purchase anything through that, it earns me a small commission. I really appreciate that. And that's how you can support what I'm doing. Okay, I appreciate it. Talk to y'all later. Peace.